Good morning, dear friends. Just gonna hit, hey, wanna hit, oh, here, mute all. Good morning. Today is Sunday, the 11th of Cheshvan. It is October 17th, 11th of Cheshvan. Well, first, we're studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Presently, studying Masechet Shabbat, chapter 8. I believe by tomorrow, with Hashem's help, we should be able to make a siyum, conclude this chapter. So we're chapter 8 for now, Masechet Shabbos. Pei Aleph Amud Beis, that's 81B. And just to refresh your memory, although I'm not sure if you need any memory refreshing on this one, we've been talking about broadly the dimensions, measures of items that are useful and thus muks on Shabbos. We took a little detour to talk about the appropriate dimensions of stones that would be permissible to carry due to kavod habriot, the essential human dignity necessary for making use of stones that were used for hygienic purposes. Along those lines, we took a little bit of a detour to discuss a little bit also about muktzah, its use, as well as certain health considerations. And when a stone is considered designated or identified as there for hygienic purposes, therefore it's not muktzah, are there different circumstances that would or wouldn't warrant or rather allow their use. We then spoke about other varying scenarios and circumstances where one may or may not be permitted to do their business because of the necessary follow-up of cleansing and that you might need to interact with your environment. And so we spoke about using your friend's yard. I guess if you have to choose which friend's yard you're going to use, you have to decide you want to choose your good friend. But anyways, it said it's discouraged from using a plowed field because you may come to smooth out the earth. And it allowed us to have a little bit of a refresher of that discussion. It could be considered bona in a home and a offshoot of plowing if it's in a field. We then went on to review or to focus on a teaching that Reish Lakish said. His teaching was about grass, and so we had the opportunity to talk about uprooting grass and if lifting up a stone is considered uprooting the grass, which led us to another discussion. It was the discussion of the flower pot and the question of if lifting up a flower pot, which has a hole underneath it, is considered detaching the plants from the ground or not. And the question really was, do we consider this planter attached to the ground or not? Initially, the idea presented is that we did not consider that to be a problem. You want to say good morning to everyone? But eventually it becomes clear, hold on. Eventually it becomes clear, you can't make noise, but you can say hello to everybody. Initially it becomes clear that there may have been a waiver in the scenario of kavod habrios, human dignity, but that does not extend to a general license to move, to transport, and to uproot such a planter. Planter, again, having very little to do with kavod habrios. Initially, the doctor, you're muted. Please unmute. We'd love to hear if you're saying something to us. But which this, hey, doctor, you're saying something?
No.
Okay.
I'm gonna go mute it again because I'm not home and I'm
okay. No worries.
Around. I'll unmute when I want to participate.
Okay. No worries. Right? No problem.
Thank you.
All right. So we end up talking about Reish Lakish, the opinion and understanding of Reish Lakish with the relationship of a stone that has grass on it, etc. Let's go inside. I think some of what we discuss is fresh and familiar, and if not, we will do a refresher. Here we go. Okay, we do need to select the page. Masechet Shabbat. While we load, of course, our gratitude to Safaria. As you can see, we're close to the end of this chapter. Let's also just do one more thing. Let's see if we can adjust the layout. And also, let's see if we can get the font size a little bigger. There we go. I think we got it. All right, here we go. Again, we may have started this on Friday, so I want to go through this fast and get to the juicy stuff. Gufa Omesh Lakish. Let's assess the teaching of Rish Lakish. Surar Shalu Bayasavim. If you have a rock, a pebble, a stone that has on it grasses, it may be used for hygienic purposes. However, if one actually plucks off the grass from the stone, that is considered uprooting grass on Shabbos, and that would be a biblical problem. Amar Rapapi taught. He wished to enforce. I'm sorry, we did this already, so I'm going to skip. Basically, here he wants to connect or compare the flower plant, the flower pot, to the stone with rock. If you recall, on Friday we also talked about. We looked online to see about moss or other plants that grow on grass. And then here's the Rashi that we spent a good bit on, talking about a proto-kaparis kind of tradition. It may have not been a proto, they may have been varying minhagim of the sort, but anyways, that was the discussion on Friday. The next section, which is where we're really up to. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Also, lekaneach becheres b'Shabbos. You use a stone, you can't use a shard of pottery, of earthenware. And the Gemara wants to know why not. My time. And the Gemara said some of the reasons that we would assume for not using a shard would be universal, would be constant, and wouldn't be exclusively appropriate on Shabbos. So we need to identify an issue that makes us that makes this a Shabbos conversation. Again, I know we did some of this on Friday, but I want to get to the next line. So my time, what's the reason that you cannot use this pottery on Shabbos? If the issue is the danger that you can't use, just like you probably shouldn't use sharp glass to scrape oneself in any manner, you might cut yourself. Well, pottery could also be quite bad for your health. The Gemara says, but that's not a Shabbos issue. Health, wellness is constant, not just on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, maybe the problem is earthenware had some kind of association in the times where witchcraft was prevalent and people took it seriously. Maybe the issue is kshafim, kishuf, magic. Well, you can't allow yourself to be susceptible to harm, whether medical, tangible, or something more of the spirit. That's also prohibited constantly. Rather, the problem is really because you might cut hair or skin, and you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. The Gemara says, it's really a matter where you don't have kavanah, and yet it's prohibited. As Rashi says, but the problem is that Rabbi Yochanan, who's the author of this teaching, generally believes that if you do not miskaven, if you do not intend to do the malacha, it's not a problem. So we're left with a little bit of a problem. What is Rabbi Yochanan saying? That you're not allowed to do it. If the issue is an act that you don't intend to, that's not problematic. If the issue is health or security, well, that's always a problem. So the Gemara now is going to try to defend and to extricate Rabbi Yochanan from this awkward situation. Rav Nassim therefore responds, or says as follows. Gabra Rabba Amar Milsa. We have a very great person. Rabbi Yochanan, who is truly one of the giants in the Talmud, in Israel. He's the pillar of the Jerusalem Talmud. So Nema Batama, we need to make his words, we need to figure out how they make sense. We need to understand what he meant to say. And here's what he meant. He said as follows. Obviously, no one needs to mention that it's prohibited on the weekday. Why? Because it's not good for your health. But maybe on Shabbos you would think that it's yet preferred to put yourself at risk to upgrade your Shabbos adherence. Why? Because a shard comes from a vessel, a pot, which is not the muktzah, and a stone does not have a Torah's kli. It's not considered a vessel, and it's a more grave degree of muktzah. So you might convince yourself that for the purposes of being very frum, for the purposes of adhering to Shabbos, you could put yourself at risk. Maybe you'll say shapir dami, maybe you'll say it's acceptable. Kamash Malon. Therefore, Rabbi Yochanan says, don't think that it's acceptable to put yourself at risk on Shabbos. It's always a problem during the week. Obviously, it's a problem because it's bad for your health. But even on Shabbos, where you might think that it's a chumrah, you still shouldn't do it because jeopardizing your well-being is also not an acceptable solution in Jewish tradition. Rashi, Aval b'Shabbos hoyo ve'ikatar is clear of lachtois or lots of mayim. So Rashi says you have use for a shard of pottery, and so you'll think the mutav sheikayach by you might think it's better to use this piece of the shard of pottery than to use a stone. Kamash malon deloi imishum sakana imishum kshafim. And there's two possible problems, but either one is sufficient to tell you not to use it even on Shabbos. This is really the Gemara that we looked at yesterday, but I went back for a very interesting and important question that we're going to see in just a moment. But first, we need to deal with an apparent contradiction within the position of Rabbi Yochanan. Rava taught the teaching of Rabbi Yochanan, and he said that the reason why Rabbi Yochanan disallows a shard was not because of the explanation over here, rather because you might cut hair. But if you understand Rabbi Yochanan based on the teaching of Rava, you got a problem. Why? Because Rabbi Yochanan is the one who doesn't care about, who cares about what your intentions are. And if you're not miskaven, if you don't intend to do malacha, he says you're off the hook. And so why here would Rabbi Yochanan not allow you to use this shard of earthenware just because of it might inadvertently cut a hair or skin tag or something, or skin? So the Gemara says, so clearly Rabbi Yochanan does believe that if you don't have kavanah, it's still a problem. He says you're not allowed to use the earthenware. And on the other hand, Rabbi Yochanan, on the flip side, Rabbi Yochanan says that you always want to take the position of an unattributed Mishnah. Let me read this fast. He taught that a Nazir, who, as we know, a Nazir has to have their hair grow long. So he taught that a Nazir is allowed to wash their hair, and they're allowed to use their fingers to comb. Avaloi soyrek. But a soyrek is a comb that you're not allowed to use. And based on this problem, where it's pretty clear that Rabbi Yochanan should not permit the use of the pottery, even if it's not because of miskaven. I'm sorry, it's clear that Rabbi Yochanan would say you shouldn't use the pottery. Therefore, we're compelled to go back to the explanation of Rav Nosson bar Oishia, that Rabbi Yochanan's problem was not cutting hair because he doesn't hold. If you don't intend to, it's not a problem. But Rabbi Yochanan would not allow it because of the danger involved. So, long story short, don't use pottery because of the potential danger. Anybody here ever encounter witchcraft? Please unmute yourself if you have anything to share about this subject. Have you ever experienced witchcraft? I'll just start off by saying I have not. Bli ayin hara. Anyone here have any experiences to share about witchcraft?
I have a book that deals with it. It's amazing. It's a whole book on witchcraft within the Jewish traditions, going back to the Gemara and throughout the ages, and the form of like Sefer HaChasidim has quite a bit of it. It's amazing, the kind of stuff. It's both folk superstition and witchcraft according to Jewish. I'd say I don't want to call it law, but it starts out with Adam Arishon. Apparently, yes. His wife, the first wife, it wasn't Chava, it was Lilith.
Yeah,
and it's amazing.
As a matter of fact, it's brought that it says that they say this. I'm sure. Hold on, let's back up. What's the name of the sefer? Do you have it offhand?
I have it upstairs. It's fascinating.
All right. When you have a moment, if you don't mind popping on the WhatsApp group, I'd love to take a look. So Yashukayach. So indeed, there's plenty of reference in Jewish tradition, law, medrash about magic, and these other is metaphysical the right word? These others not quite material, not quite scientifically understood forces in the world. As a matter of fact, I'm sorry.
He was riding on a donkey, and it turned out the donkey was actually a woman.
So we're going to see this Gemara is also going to have such a story. I just
got the suppose the magic didn't work by water, when they went to take a drink by
Yeah,
water.
yeah, yeah.
turned
So
back.
the Gemara said in the Gemara, Rashi quotes when it says that Avraham Avinu sent away right. Avraham Avinu had children with 3 women, Hagar, Sarah, and Keturah. Of course, we all know that there's a strong opinion in the Gemara that Keturah and Hagar were the same person, and then ultimately Hagar came back around and did Teshuvah, again connected to these parshas. But it says that Avraham Avinu sent away the children of Keturah, and he gave them gifts. So you know what Rashi says the gifts were? So I believe Rashi says he gave them the gifts of these kishafim, magic. So how to make sense of it? It's a big hashkafe question. I don't want to go into it now. Suffice it to say, I hope I'm sorry?
Rabbi,
Bill Olmos, a sorcerer. Yes, doctor.
how does the concept of ayin hara enter into the broader family of witchcraft?
Actually, hold on. I got to now give a plug. A friend of mine, let me just Google this so we can give you the exact, and then we'll get back into the Gemara, because I think his book probably deals with this. There's a rabbi in Plantation. He actually spoke to us a few times. Chabad Plantation, Rabbi Pinchas Taylor, and he is an author. He wrote one book which is about the fundamental tenets of Jewish emunah. A brilliant work, a very good work and a good resource. But his second work, which I don't own, but hold on, let's just take a look, because I'm sure he goes into this at length. Okay, his first work is Pillar of Faith. I'm going to send him an invoice for this advertisement. But his new book, let's see if I could find it on his website. Let's see, shop. Just give me a second. I think it's worth the moment. Oh, here. No. Hey, he doesn't have his new book on here. Hold on. Bear with me, folks. The Guide to the Mysterious, a relatively new book called A Jewish Guide to the Mysterious, and I'm sure he discusses this and many other issues. So anyways, okay, the page isn't exactly loading, but here you can see it's on Amazon. Suffice it to say, all right, my computer is not adept for handling so much stimulation, so, well, anyways, suffice it to say, I'm sure he gives a good overview on this matter and many other matters. But back to our topic at hand. Although Baruch Hashem, I hope none of us have experienced witchcraft or magic, and exactly how to make sense of it is complicated and varying opinions. As we can imagine, the Rambam is going to say that it was entirely a sleight of hand and something that was manipulation of different phenomena that the average people didn't know. And so if you could manipulate those phenomena, you could do things that the populace understood to be the magic. But other Rishonim and probably...
Rabbi, I think that a lot depends on terminology. That is, what they used to call witchcraft in the past might be what we today call just unusual ability of a person to understand other person, to do hypnosis, or to understand what another person means by small signs of behavior, all kinds of things which are not accessible for most of human beings, but which some individuals, exceptional individuals, could really do.
Right. So certainly what you're expressing is probably the way we all hope this is, and certainly probably akin to the Rambam's understanding. But there are other scholars, other Rishonim that understand, and I think the scholars of Kabbalah and mystical ideas, I believe, are not fast to entirely discount the possibility or the once upon a time existence of such forces and capabilities. And so other Rishonim say it was real, but it doesn't exist today, or it was real, but it's limited. So there are varying opinions. I'm actually, believe now that I'm going to order a few copies for the show, The Jewish Guide to the Mysterious. And I'm going to get one for myself because I want to see what he writes over there. I'm sure he does a nice job. He does a pretty good job usually on collecting the different.
I'll tell you a personal story. You asked
Okay.
me for a personal.
Yes.
My mother, Aliyah Shalom, when I remember it happening only once or twice. When we were really sick, it was in Yiddish called Leshen Koilen. I don't know if you ever heard the terminology, Koilen Leshen. And what it was, she took a cup of water and with some pieces of bread, and she would say an incantation in Yiddish about three witches sitting around a fire, and this one says this and says this. I don't remember the whole thing, but I remember once being ill, and whether it's psychosomatic or whatever, when she was finished, I felt much better.
Oh,
Crazy stuff. I mean, aside from going back to the old ways, I mean, aside from witchcraft, my father used to do to the family, bunkus, yeah, he had them and he used them. He used them on me once. It wasn't very pleasant. In Hebrew, it's called kosod ruach.
I think Bankis was an essential part of medicine until
Yeah.
not that long ago.
I mean, even today in many German congregations, on the eve of the bris, the night before the bris, they bring in small children to say Shema.
Yes,
And
yes.
basically, it's to cast away the shadim.
Actually, doctor, and I want to stop with this, but actually, it's more than that. If you'll read up in your book, it's connected to Lilith that you mentioned at the beginning of our discussion. So, anyways, all right, let's read the Gemara because the Gemara is going to give us enough material to keep this going. So the Gemara asks, Mike Shafim. So you might think the Gemara is asking what does Kshafim mean, but the Gemara is not asking what is Kshafim. The Gemara wants to understand what is the association or what type of Kshafim are we talking about over here about a shard. So let's take a look. So the Gemara answers, Rav Chisda, we can reference the story of Rav Chisda v'Rabba bar Rav Huna. They had a story, they encountered Kishuf, and the information they gleaned from there is helpful over here. They were traveling by sea, they were traveling on a boat. Amra lahu hahi matronisa. And there was a certain woman who wanted to join them and says, Osvan bahadaichu, please let me catch a ride with you guys. Veloy osvuha. They did not permit her to join them on the boat. Why didn't they? So, interestingly, we learned earlier on in the Gemara. I don't remember. We had a little bit of a Gemara. There was also somewhat of the mystical. There was different opinions if you should travel with people of varying nationalities or if you should travel with people of your own nation. I don't even remember that. And one of the ideas was that if you travel with people of another nation, maybe they're destined to have some kind of misfortune, and you'll be swept along with them. And so it seems like, at least some of the commentaries say, that they were being mindful of this idea, and they didn't want, because matronisa usually, I believe, is a reference to like a Roman noblewoman or people of the Gentile upper strata of society, and their faith discouraged them from, or their understanding is that it would not be a good idea to let her on the boat, and so they did not do so. Alternatively, some of the commentaries on En Yaakov says maybe it was a matter of yichud. Right, in Jewish law, although it's not biblical, men and women should not be secluded in a private setting. And or alternatively, maybe they understood that this lady has some mysterious metaphysical powers that they weren't interested in experiencing up close. So she says, "Please, can I join you, gentlemen?" And they said, "I'm sorry, but we're leaving and we don't have any room." Anyways, Amra ihi milsa. So she said some kind of incantation. Asarta la'arba, and the movement of the boat was arrested. It stopped moving. Rashi, what did she say? Oh, by the way, but matronisa, Rashi says nachrisaisa. This was a Gentile woman. The reason probably why Rashi feels it necessary to explain that is probably so that we could reference the earlier Gemara or to understand or maybe, anyways. Amra Milsa, she said an incantation. Dichshafim, she whispered something that was associated with sorcery. And suddenly the boat froze in its place. So what do? If your boat is stuck due to sorcery, due to witchcraft, so Amru inhu milsa. So the two rabbis, Rav Chisda and Rabba bar Rav Huna, also started saying an incantation. And Shayuha, now the boat was released and continued along. This is the first part of the story. Let's read a little further, and then we'll wonder what exactly these rabbis said and what this lady said. Amar lahu. So she tells them, Oy vey, my abed lechu, what can I do with you? Deloy mekanech lechu bekaspa. You don't use shards of earthenware for when you clean yourself. Deloy katu lechu kina amonaicho, and you don't kill a louse when it's on your clothing. Deloy shalif lechu yarka, the achol lechu mikisha, the asar gina. You do not pull out a vegetable from the bundle of vegetables. Therefore, what it sounds like she's saying is, and therefore you are less susceptible to my powers of witchcraft. Let's read Rashi. Because a person that uses earthenware can become somehow susceptible to witchcraft. I'm sorry, you don't kill a louse in your clothing, and you don't eat the vegetables. Rashi says, you don't take out the onion, the garlic, and other vegetables from the bundle, the way the garden, the harvesting of the gardeners collect. Rather, you first untie the string that binds them together. Shma Kohani Kasha L'Chshafim. Rashi tells us we can infer from her statement that all of these practices could make one more susceptible to the power of witchcraft. All right, so let's back up. First of all, Mike Shafim. What does it mean, Shafim? Well, here we have a story where an expert practitioner of witchcraft informed the rabbis that use of a shard in the manner that we've described that is not permissible could actually cause a person to be susceptible to witchcraft. Now, what did the rabbis say to be freed of this witchcraft? How do you call it? When you park in the wrong place, they could have put a boot on your car. Well, they had a witchcraft kind of way to lock your boat up. So Rashi says that what they said was al yidei shem tahara. They said something from the holy sphere, maybe a shame of Hashem, a name of Hashem, or something to that effect. As we know, or as it can be, there are people there are students of Kabbalah, and then there's Kabbalah Masit. There are those people that are able to use certain meditations and names of Hashem in a kind of a Kabbalistic way to affect reality. As a matter of fact, we read that Moshe Rabbeinu killed in self-defense, or in the fellows of another, he took the life of someone. And how did he do it? So one of the opinions is, right, that he said it in the name of Hashem. So we understand that Shemot can be effective. Most students of Kabbalah today are not practitioners of Kabbalah Ma'asit, of practical Kabbalah, but it was once a thing. And I think, anyways, so that's Rashi's opinion, but that's not what everybody says. Others say that they actually used a counteracting incantation from sorcery, which leads us to the question, is a Jew permitted to practice sorcery? And there are those that say that actually usually not, but one might be allowed to use sorcery to free themselves from a spell. But what I want to share with you, and what I found most interesting, is something from the Baal Shem Tov. And let me see if I can share this with you. Here. So this is in the footnote of the Mesifta, but I also heard it on another shir. So this is something that's well connected to our Gemara. And then maybe we'll take a fast peek at the Ben Yoyada as well. Rashi and another Gemara says that they actually were well versed in the best practices of counter witchcraft technology. And although usually you're not allowed to use technology, here they were saving their lives, because you think she was just going to hold their boat up. What was going to happen next could have been a whole lot worse. The Baal Shem Tov asks, if witchcraft is real and it's a real and present danger, Couldn't the Gemara have been kind and at least tell us what to do if we encounter such trouble? And in truth, many other places in the Gemara, we've encountered this already in our journey in Gemara, and we'll find it many in other places as well. The Gemara occasionally does provide the words to an incantation. We talked about it when we were talking about healing, right? Remember earlier on in the Masechta? The Baal Shem Tov says, you know how you should untie yourself from Kishuf? By reading the words of the Torah from the Pasuk, Ma'chashefa lo techayeh. In the Torah, it talks about how it's prohibited for a Jew to practice witchcraft. And if a person practices witchcraft, Ma'chashefa lo techayeh, you should not leave them alive. So there's an associated death penalty. And the Baal Shem Tov says that when you say that word, there are deep mystical kavanis that cause the sorcerers to be neutralized. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Look what it says over here. Amru inhu, they said, milta. Milta means a word. But the theory is that possibly the original manuscript didn't say milta. It said mem milt, mem lametaf, which could be a possible variation of the word milta. What would mem lametaf stand for? Anyone want to take a guess what mem lametaf stands for? Ma'chashefa lo techayeh. So it's possible, based on the Baal Shem Tov's teaching, that the old manuscript had an acronym, mem lametaf, ma'chashefa lo techayeh, and when it was being typeset or when it was being copied, someone saw and they said, oh, they forgot the aleph at the end. They were meant to write milta. And it's a reasonable mistake because it already says here that she said a milta, right? She said a word, which means an incantation. So, right? She said a milta. So it's a reasonable assertion that they also said a milta. But based on this teaching, the Baal Shem Tov says that originally said mem lametaf, ma'chashefa lo techayeh, and that's what they said to get themselves free of this lock of the sorcerer. And that is an interesting.
But does the Gemara ever any other place use Roshei Tevot? I don't recall that.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Many times. And perhaps today, mem lametaf is not a familiar acronym, but maybe at a time where witchcraft, sorcery was very prevalent, maybe everybody knew, of course, mem lametaf, that's, the code for, that's how we block a sorcery. This is brought in a sefer called Mitzaref Avodah, and he writes that he heard it from the Baal Sharei Teshuvah in the name of the Baal Shem Tov. So suffice it to say, this is it's not often that we quote the Baal Shem Tov in the commentaries of the Talmud. But here we have an interesting pshat from the Baal Shem Tov to understand this Gemara. Very interesting. Now, give me one more second. So I opened up there's a collection of commentaries on this Gemara. And so the question that we asked, why didn't they want her on board? So we already read from the Ein Yaakov that they were afraid maybe like the Gemara taught that they'd be vulnerable to her misfortune. They could drown. And remember, we know that once upon a time, going on a boat was like anytime you stepped foot on a boat, you had probably like a 25% chance you're not returning. So you can't blame them for being a little uneasy and wanting to avoid all kinds of risks. Okay, he just repeats what I shared with you before. The Rambam, as I mentioned, describes how all of this sorcery is bogus. And seemingly this Gemara would negate the Rambam's understanding. The Gemara takes the position that this is a very real thing. Many commentaries might point to this Gemara, many other Gemaras to push back, and that is one of the sources used. Hold on, I'm just showing you through a few other vignettes that I'm coming across over here. The other question is what exactly they said. So the Rashi says it was the name of Tahara or some kind of Kabbalistic holy counter spell. The Baal Shem Tov says they said the pasuk Ma'chashefa lo techayeh, which they reminded or they embodied and they brought to the present the fact that there's no force that can outforce Hashem, and by quoting the Torah, they were able to push away any other kind of force or energy. Others say that they actually said words of sorcery, and it was permissible because they had to save their lives. And the Rosh Yosef writes that really there's no indication from our Gemara exactly what they said. The Gemara just says milta. Milta is a saying, an incantation. It could be holy, it could be from Kishuf, it could be a pasuk. It's very, very open-ended.
Rabbi,
Yes.
aren't
Welcome,
we
Alan.
aren't we practicing sorcery on Friday nights when we come back from shul, where we're accompanied by two angels to protect us from demons? And aren't
Alan,
we?
hold on, Alan. First of all, I want to thank you for being consistent, because I recall you've referenced the angels in the past, and so you always are I would say are like, take the Rambam's position, and it's good. And I want to compliment you for your consistency. Some people, they take different positions, but you always help us. So it's a good question. So I think that in English, we might use the word sorcery to be all matters of the supernatural, or all matters of the metaphysical. But in the Gemara's context, the use of kishuf would not extend to the idea of angels per se. Angels is another question, and it is a good question of how to understand what it means, but it's not identical in the Gemara's use of the word kishuf. It would not extend to include angels, and it's possible that it even wouldn't extend to demonology, which is another conversation. However, Alan, you're very meduyak in that there are sources in the Gemara, and actually in Gemara Psachim, which associate a lot of the issues of kishuf that is associated with demons. So you're actually onto something. This isn't my expertise. I'm going to have to leave it somewhat at a question mark. Suffice it to say, the practice of Shalom Aleichem is acceptable. But one more thing, there is discussion in Jewish scholarship about the relationship that a Jew has with angels, because we should never be praying to an angel. We're praying to Hashem. If Hashem chooses to dispatch an angel in the process of how Hashem chooses to intervene, we'll accept it. But it is important to be mindful as Jews, we never want to pray to angels. And so therefore, there is a conversation about the role of angels in Jewish belief and how much power and independence we might credit an angel. And so this is all a long way to say you bring up very good points, and you're mechav into true and significant considerations. But because I'm out of my league, and because there are greater authorities, I'm going to have to leave it with a little bit of an unsatisfactory resolution. But I do want to give a plug once again to the work, A Jewish Guide to the Mysterious by Rabbi Pinchas Taylor, where I have a feeling he goes through these items at length. And I know he starts with the sciences, and then he gives the scientific understanding, and then he gives the varying understandings within Judaism. And I'm fairly certain that this is a topic that he would address with much greater clarity than I can present over here.
What about the understanding of not reciting Tehillim after Mariv and before midnight? Isn't that got to do with demons?
I'm not sure if it has to do with demons. It might have to do with different restrictions on studying Torah, and how to study and how to pray, and asking requests from Hashem before Chatzot and after Chatzot, if there's times of Ratzon or not, beyond the scope of my expertise and a little bit out of the Gemara. Suffice it to say, Alan, there are many spiritual, Kabbalistic, and metaphysical explanations for a variety of Jewish practices. I'll just throw in one more. Last night in Shul, we did Kiddush Levana. And at the close of Kiddush Levana, in Kiddush Levana, we do two interesting practices. We say Shalom Aleichem.
That's right. Lechem Shalom.
Right? Shalom. So why do we do Shalom Aleichem, Aleichem Shalom? Because Kiddush Levana was a practice that was done at night. You go outside into the vast wilderness where demons run wild, but demons are scared. They only attack you when you're vulnerable and alone. And so we make a little noise. We say Shalom Aleichem. One of the reasons is to make the demons realize that it's not worth messing, because we've got a big group of Jewish people doing a Jewish ritual. That's one explanation, or that's one idea. And second of all, when we leave and we go back and we finish Kiddush Levana, what do? So it says in the Siddur, and it says in Shulchan Aruch that you shake the fringes of your garments or your tzitzis. And that's also symbolically casting off any kind of negative attachments that may have crept and attached to us while we were outside in the danger zone. And so that may also be associated with some of these ideas of the metaphysical and demons and the like. So that's not going to give you clarity, but I just have to throw in one more. And there are many of other practices that are somewhat connected to beliefs or understandings about metaphysical. I'll just say one more thing. They say that in the time of the Baal Shem Tov, or maybe the preceding generation of Baalei Shem, these were masters of Kabbalistic practice, and they in those days dealt with a lot of issues from demons. And there's a whole story that says that they kind of banished the demons from the universe. So even if you believe they exist, they were banished from civilization in the modern age. And the only way you can encounter a demon today is if you go to a Jewish overnight camp and you stay up late at the fire and you listen to your counselor's story. You may very well be privileged. Anyways, all right, so let's go back. But back to the Gemara. So from this whole story, what we can extract is that using earthenware can make one vulnerable to the forces, to the grasp of sorcery at a time where it was prevalent. I cannot explain to you how or why, because I'm very not well educated on the art of witchcraft and sorcery. Suffice it to say, that's the story. Now, before we continue, I do want to jump into one more commentary over here, which I haven't studied, so we're going to do this in real time, but he always has interesting things to add, and this is obviously a very thought-provoking topic. So let's take a look at the Ben Yoyada. And he has a good question. Was Rav Chisda and Rabbi Bar Avuna, were they sailors? Were they the ones, navigating the ship? That's what it sounds like. They were telling him yes or no, and then their boat stopped, and then they got it unstuck. So he says, nearly, obviously they weren't the captains. They weren't the sailors of the ship. So there must have been a crew. And these rabbis rented the whole boat for themselves. And being that they must have rented out the whole ship, no one could force the owner, the captain, couldn't allow anyone else onto the ship without the customer's approval. Therefore, she asked permission. So this is pretty obvious. This is kind of how I imagined it. It would be like, if you hire a taxi driver, the taxi can't pick up another fare if and then he says, I saw the Chida wrote, in the name of the author of the In Yaakov, that they didn't want to sit together because our Gemara, again, I know I already shared this with you. You shouldn't travel along with a person of another nation because maybe they are deserving of din, of punishment. And then the Chida makes a very good point. Hold on a second. This is a little bit challenging. You know why? What are the odds that the entire crew and the captain were all of the same nationality as these two rabbis? It's very likely, we're talking about rabbis living in Bavel, that the crew they hired already were not of the Jewish faith. And so therefore, what would they care if there should be another person of another background on the boat?
Well, actually, with Yonah Navi was the exact opposite.
Right, because Yonah was the one that was in trouble, and he brought trouble to everybody else. So this is not a discrimination against Dafka, against people of another nation. The idea is that the more diversity you have on the boat, the more susceptibility you have that someone's going to get in trouble. So I know today we can't be opposed to diversity, but over here there's an interesting reason that you don't want to make another person vulnerable to your cheshbon, and you don't want to be vulnerable to someone else's cheshbon.
So I guess going on a cruise is out.
Well, actually, if you recall the Gemara, there was two opinions. One opinion was it was Rav and Shmuel. I don't remember who says what. I think Rav says that you should only travel with the same people, and Shmuel says you dafka want to go with other people because Hashem's not going to take on everybody. If maybe you are in trouble, and by being in a crowd of other people that aren't meriting trouble, maybe that'll be like your life vest. So there are two different perspectives. Now he says, he challenges the Chida. He says, why are you assuming that his crew were Gentile? Why didn't he hire Jews? Somehow he says that in those days, the average crew was not necessarily of the Jewish faith. Because it could be in those days you did have Jewish crew, and therefore maybe their crew was actually Jewish. Alternatively, this is very interesting. Maybe these people are in less danger on a boat. You know why? Because if you're part of a full-time crew of a boat, you probably know how to swim very well, and so you have the best odds of surviving a shipwreck. Very interesting. I'm not sure what to do with all of this, but it's very interesting. Especially because the boat that we're talking about here was not a ship going in the sea. It was talking about a riverboat. Because the rabbis lived in Bavel, in ancient Iraq. And Iraq is right near the Euphrates and the other great rivers. And in these rivers, if you know how to swim, you'll be okay. But another passenger, especially a passenger of the elite who probably wasn't hardened by the challenges of life, she likely doesn't know how to swim. And so if she's destined to be taken down, or if it's her time to go, it would be reasonable that a shipwreck would be the kind of thing. Okay, anyway, very interesting subject. Certainly a change of pace from our typical discussions. But there is another consideration that I just have to bring up because I don't know if we have time to go on to the next Gemara, so I just want to share with you. There was a big controversy, and I'm sure Dr. Stammer, maybe you and others, I'm sure you recall this. I only know this from the books, but as we know, and I think we discussed this here once before, in the early days of the state of Israel, so you had Zim Shipping Company, and there was a big rabbinic halachic controversy if to use that shipping company, because it was employing Jews, which is a good thing. But the question was, how do they navigate Shabbat? And are you allowed to operate a boat on Shabbat? So ironically, in that conversation, not to get into the halacha l'maseh, but in that conversation, ironically, if you're traveling on Shabbos, you might dafka want to have a crew that's not Shabbos, that doesn't need to observe Shabbos. Actually, the Lubavitcher Rebbe was involved in this controversy, and suffice it to say, the Rebbe staked the position, and people told the Rebbe, "You're wrong." The Rebbe said, "Listen, you're rabbis." But the Rebbe was an engineer, and he actually worked on boats in his career before he became Rebbe. The Rebbe wasn't looking for the limelight. He wasn't even looking necessarily for rabbinics. And in the war effort, when he came over, he worked in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And the Rebbe was by training, he had an engineering degree, and the Rebbe worked in the war effort. And so the Rebbe said, you can only weigh upon from the halachic angle. The Rebbe says, this is my expertise. And the Rebbe said that it was impossible for a boat in those days to be on autopilot for 25 hours, which was the assertion that some made. So anyways, I don't want to give a psak halacha over there, but suffice it to say it was a big challenge in the early days of the state of Israel because of the conflict, the internal conflict of wanting to, of course, only employ Jewish people, but on the other hand, to be mindful of Shabbos observance. So that's another consideration when you go on a boat and the nationality of your crew.
Well, I thought that many poskim say that you cannot go on a boat after Tuesday because of too close to Shabbos.
For similar reasons. But actually, we learned that in the Gemara too. There are those that say that it's connected to Chilul Shabbos, but it's also connected to seasickness. You can't intentionally put yourself into a position where you're going to be out of commission on Shabbos. So it's a long discussion. We had it a while back. I really should review it already. It's been a while. But
we also had a Gemara which discussed the details of the rabbis going from the boat on Shabbos, whether they could walk on the plank that was set for them or it was not permitted. That is, it means they were able to travel on Shabbos.
Yeah, so you're allowed to travel, but you weren't allowed to start out. But if you're on a boat, especially if the Gemara, if I recall, talks about Litzorech mitzvah, what if you're lobbying against the Romans to not kill or imprison or to allow Jewish practice? So there were waivers, but even those waivers had limitations, or possibly had limitations. Anyways, my dear friends, this concludes today's Gemara. I want to thank you all for being here. Certainly a little bit of a change of pace. Although Baruch Hashem, we've had a few of these Gemaras recently, and I want to thank everyone for your invaluable contributions to the conversation. Today's class has been brought to you by A Jewish Guide to the Mysterious by Rabbi Pinchas Taylor. Today, and Dr. Stamler, when you come across that book, if you don't mind, if you'll send us a picture of the covers, I'd love to take a look.
I will. I'll go to Amazon and I'll post the Amazon. name
Okay,
and you can
shkoyach.
read about it.
Also, just to close out, we're praying for a speedy recovery for Leah Basrita, Harav Shimon Alevi ben Leah, Yosef and Chai. They should all have a speedy recovery. And we're learning Lilo Nishmas, Daniel Yerachmiel ben Gedalia, and Arya Yaakov ben Litman. We should only have good news for all of Klal Yisrael. Looking forward to seeing everybody tomorrow. Be'ezer Hashem. Thank you all.
Thank you.